It is a warm spring day in 1943, and a flight of American fighters are patrolling over the Mediterranean. These are aircraft of the 57th Fighter Group, assigned to look for any Germans in the area. But after a couple of uneventful patrols that day, and their fuel gauges showing that they are near the end of their range, it appears that this would be yet another dull mission. But then, one of their pilots spots something, a glimmer of sunlight reflecting off an aluminum wing below. Rubbing their eyes, the pilots cannot believe it. One of the largest flights of aircraft they have ever seen, low, just above the surface of the water. Still in disbelief, the lead Warhawk reacts and pushes his plane over to begin an attack that would go down as the Palm Sunday Massacre, one of the greatest aerial slaughters in history, and the event that would end any German hopes for victory in North Africa. With the calendar turning to April of 1943, the North African campaign is reaching a crucial moment. As the Americans have now entered the war in full force and the British have recovered from earlier setbacks, Rommel and the Axis forces on the continent are now being pushed back into Tunisia, lacking the fuel and ammunition to hold their positions as logistics continue to bedevil the Wehrmacht. Being across the Mediterranean and encircled in Tunisia, their only hope is resupply by air, an assignment taken on by the transport planes of the Luftwaffe. As Rommel bides for time with skirmishes, transport aircraft from German airfields in Sicily increase their activity to daily and nightly flights to try and provide a lifeline for the beleaguered Afrika Korps. The primary aircraft utilized in this operation would be the Junkers Ju-52, a tri-motor transport that served in high numbers for the Luftwaffe in many capacities, but was undoubtedly slow and lightly defended, with just 1 or 2 machine guns protecting it from aerial attack. In the early phases of the aerial supply effort, the Luftwaffe's air transport groups completed a reasonable number of sorties, but saw the most success at night, operating with very few losses under the cover of darkness. During the day, however, casualties were slowly mounting, primarily from Allied fighters. But luckily for the Allies, the Germans had failed to adjust their strategy accordingly, and increased both day and nighttime sorties, with the situation in Tunisia becoming more desperate, still under the belief that the flight from Tunisia to Sicily was so short that the chances of Allied fighter interception would be incredibly low. This is because the Germans were still completely unaware that the British were reading all of their communications through the Ultra program. This information would work perfectly with a plan put together by the Allies to try and halt this supply effort, codenamed Operation Flax. This plan would be authored by Jimmy Doolittle himself, the commander of the Northwest African Strategic Air Force. Operation Flax would see Allied fighter patrols airborne ahead of time and quickly routed to the anticipated locations of supply flights once communications were intercepted. But with over 400 transport aircraft taking part in the effort by the start of April, they had plenty of work to do. With German losses creeping higher, the Luftwaffe High Command was certain to soon realize the flaw in their strategy and adjust their missions to exclusive nighttime operations. The opportunity for this blow was coming and would shockingly be delivered by one of the least likely units, executing a flawless strategy and bringing about their most famous moment. But while they're taking off, before we get to this specific unit and the defining moment of their career, let's talk about the best strategy for your career, using a personal career coach from this video's sponsor, Strawberry.me. Recently, with all my work here, I've found myself disorganized and struggling to keep up with all the tasks of making this content. Fortunately, Strawberry.me came in and offered me a chance to hop onto their easy-to-use platform and meet with one of their certified career coaches. She was super friendly and helped me analyze my own schedule and workload to determine opportunities for growth. Since then, I've made my work process here more efficient and have been able to spend more time doing the things that I enjoy. Their coaches are trained not to instruct, but to instead understand you and your goals and to help you figure out how to achieve them. Whether that's getting that next promotion, finding more fulfillment, or navigating a difficult time in your career, a coach from strawberry.me is ready to help. So don't wait, head to strawberry.me/TJ3History or use promo code TJ3History to get matched with the best certified coach for you and get your career headed in the right direction. After all, remember, you'll never regret investing in yourself. Now, let's get back to the story. For the first 10 days of this operation in early April, American P-38 units, like the 1st Fighter Group, ran the show, striking airfields and intercepting transport flights across the Mediterranean with their cannons, elite speed, and range. But the German flights would still continue, and around this time, their goal was changed. The Africa Corps now realized the inevitable outcome of the situation. They were surrounded, outgunned, and undersupplied. Thus, the transport operations previously carrying supplies into Tunisia now turned into an evacuation effort as well, as there were currently more than 200,000 German and Italian soldiers trapped near Tunis. By mid-April, many of the transport flights that were made carried supplies into Tunisia to prolong the last defense. Then they would load up with as much personnel as could be carried and headed back for Sicily. One of the largest of these sorties was scheduled to be flown on the afternoon of April 18, 1943. This would involve 65 Junkers Ju-52s, escorted by roughly 20 German and Italian fighters flying above, including Me-109s, 110s, and even a few Italian 202s. Despite multiple sorties being sent up in search of German transport flights, no American fighter units had been able to locate anything. The transport sorties had learned to fly extremely low in order to avoid radar detection and make themselves more difficult to spot. And for the first leg of this flight, their plan would work, and the transports delivered their supplies, then picked up battered troops for evacuation and took off again for Sicily. On the Allied side of Operation Flax, one of the least involved units up until this point had been the 57th Fighter Group, a unit of older P-40 Warhawks. Their action had been minimal due to the fact that the P-40 was a slower aircraft with far less range than the P-38, which is what was flown by most other units in the theater at this time. The Warhawk could fly up to a range of just 700 miles, seriously limiting her capability as a combat interceptor. Nonetheless, it would be these P-40s that would find the spotlight on April 18th of 1943. After multiple uneventful patrols that day, the 57th Fighter Group took off for one more patrol with 48 fighters assigned to search the areas around Tunis and Cape Bon, with a handful of Royal Air Force Spitfires as top cover, protecting them from German fighters. While over the Mediterranean, a few miles off the coast, the pilots were close to bingo fuel and were about to turn back to base, when one of their pilots called out, "Aircraft below." Looking down, just spotting the glimmer of the sun off the wings, was a massive formation of what appeared to be Junkers Ju-52s, the target that they had been so desperately looking for. Originally, the call-out listed 30 bandits, but in reality, the pilots soon came to realize that it was more than 60. The Spitfires flying above relayed that fighter escort was present as well, and that they would take care of that. After taking one moment to double-check that it wasn't a trap, 57th leaders like Captain Roy Whitaker and his P-40 Miss Fury turned in and dove at the ripe targets. Captain Whitaker would later recall.
I attacked the Ju-52s from astern at high speed and fired at two planes in the leading formation. The bursts were short, and the only effect I saw was pieces flying off the cabin of the second ship. I pulled away and circled to the right and made my second attack. I fired two bursts into two more 52s. Again in the leading formation, they both burst into flames. The second flew a little distance and then crashed into the water. I lost sight of the first and didn't see it hit. I then made a third pass and sent a good burst into the left of the formation at another Junkers. As I pulled away, it crashed into the water. By that time, the 109s were among us. As I pulled up to the left, I saw a 109 dive through an element of four Warhawks, and I tagged on his underside and gave him a long burst in the belly. He crashed into the sea from 1,000 feet. It was a pilot's dream. I'd never seen such a complete massacre of the enemy in my life. I was afraid someone would wake me up.
For the 57th Fighter Group, it was a dream indeed. But for the Germans aboard the transports, it was a nightmare. According to some American pilots, the German infantry on board could be seen firing their machine guns through the windows of the Ju-52s, desperately trying to fend off the inevitable attack. But the Warhawks would not be stopped. The slaughter continued as the P-40s came back through the lumbering formations and poured in every round of ammunition they had, with some pilots stating that parts of aircraft felt like they were falling out of the sky everywhere, and that the biggest challenge was fighting off fellow P-40s to get a shot at the next transport. The Ju-52s went down one after another, with many falling directly into the ocean, while others crash-landed on the coast or even purposefully landed their aircraft to avoid being shot down. Meanwhile, the Spitfires continued to tangle with the fighters, keeping most of them at bay, while the P-40s dealt the crippling blow to the evacuation flights. In just a few minutes, the Warhawks were out of fuel, and what was previously a massive flight of enemy aircraft had been completely broken up and wiped out. The remaining fighters from both sides turned for home, with the Germans licking their wounds and the Americans headed for the biggest celebration of the war. Upon landing, the tallies were counted, and after bringing them down to a reasonable number, as was typical in such a chaotic air battle, the final tally was 74 total kills, with 51 of them being German transport aircraft. A summary of the victory can be seen from a few days later in the London edition of the Stars and Stripes newspaper.
Breaking news, U.S. flyers blast Rommel escape planes. Fighters shoot down 51 transport planes bearing Axis troops. The first indication that the Axis forces might try to escape out of their strong box in the Tunisian tip by air came yesterday with news of a sensational and smashing air victory yesterday by Allied planes. 74 enemy planes, 51 of them transports carrying troops out of Tunisia, were shot down by the famous fighter group of the 9th U.S. Army Air Force. Only 9 U.S. planes failed to return. The air battle was a massacre and Axis fighters could do little to prevent it, an official statement said. Only when their ammunition was exhausted and their fuel low, the Warhawks gave up the chase. RAF records indicate that never before in this war were 74 enemy planes shot down in a single engagement.
After the war, German records could be cross-examined, and the claims were fairly close to accurate. According to German sources, Luftwaffe losses were likely 24 transport planes shot down at sea, 35 transports landing on the coast due to damage, and 9 Me-109s lost, with 1 Me-110 as well. Here we can see 2 of the stars of the 57th Fighter Group after this mission, the first American Army Air Force aces in a day, Richard Duffy and MacArthur Powers, who both shot down 5 in the slaughter that would come to be known as the April 18th Goose Shoot, or to the Germans as the Palm Sunday Massacre. As for their evacuation and resupply efforts, this loss was a crippling blow to Axis forces. They would lose more than 20% of their entire North African transport force in this single sortie. By the time the Luftwaffe air bases had to be evacuated in Tunisia, German ground crew members often opted to climb into fighter fuselages or even squeeze into the cockpits with their pilots, rather than fly aboard transport aircraft. Never again would transport planes operate in such numbers, especially during the day. Because of Operation Flax and the loss of supply lifelines and any evacuation routes, the Germans would see more than 200,000 men captured with the fall of Tunisia. That would come just a few weeks after the Palm Sunday massacre. In case you didn't know, I'm not AI. I am actually TJ and I make these videos. If you guys enjoyed it, please consider supporting my work on Patreon here so I can keep making them and get your name on the supporter wall behind me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.